Good day, fellow historians. My name is Kelly Mayer, and I would like to speak with you briefly about the amazing life and ministry of David Brainerd. David was born to an affluent Connecticut family who valued religion and education. He was raised with 8 siblings, all with this mentality that religion was important, but he never knew the Lord for himself until much later. He started his junior year at Yale University when he was 23 years old, and this was during the time of revival. Revival was happening in Europe. It was spreading across the colonies, and David's contact with revival preachers, and particularly with Salmon Stoddard's The Life of Christ, really impacted David on his own journey toward a personal faith. He was very passionate and had quite a temper on him during his time at Yale, and unfortunately that yielded his studies moot when he was expelled very near the end of his time there. Unfortunately, the leaders of the established religion didn't much care for young men with a temper, but neither did they care for itinerant preaching or this revivalism that had taken the colonies by storm. So in their defense, they were concerned about heretical problems and emotionally bizarre displays happening at some of the revival meetings. But sadly, what they didn't take into account was the impact that these revival meetings were having on the young people of the day and really drawing them to the Lord and increasing their faith in Him and desire to serve Him. Jonathan Edwards himself, referring to Thomas Clapp, the rector at Yale, and his ilk, is quoted as saying, "God poured out His Spirit to make men holy, not to make them politicians." John Grigg quotes this in his book, The Lives of David Brainerd. And he wasn't wrong. Unfortunately, while they posited that they were trying to protect good religion, their approach was very legalistic and cost some good people in some harsh ways. David Brainerd himself was not allowed to graduate from Yale, but he was a little bit older and wiser and more humble and more temperate when he petitioned one more time if he could please graduate from Yale and receive his licensing to be a preacher, and he was denied. So that was quite a blow, but what ended up happening was that David took his sweet self across the river, and at a totally different association, totally different establishment, he was eventually licensed to preach. And even though that was the case, he never did find a church to fill the pulpit as a legitimate preacher. Now, he would have done very well as an itinerant preacher, but there were harsh penalties for that during that day. It was not appreciated or supported by established religion. And having come from a very orderly family, and especially as he was growing in his faith, wanting to be on the up and up with integrity, David really wanted a legitimate ministry, not one that was going to drag his name and the name of the Lord through the mud. Well, what ended up happening was that the Lord called him to minister to American Indians along the Delaware River, and that's what he did. His ministry was actually fairly brutal. He spent a lot of time sleeping on the ground, not eating a whole lot more than boiled corn, riding all day in inclement weather, which would have been hard enough for any man, but David Brainerd suffered from chronic tuberculosis, and so he was not particularly in great shape for that type of demanding ministry, especially since the first couple of years were very unfruitful. But thankfully, toward the end of his ministry, everything just blossomed. Brainerd's interpreter and his wife became saved in what Jeremy Lance calls a spiritual awakening, as they ended up communicating Jesus in a whole new way to the Indians there, and they came to know the Lord. Unfortunately, David Brainerd's tuberculosis took over, and he succumbed to it at just 29 years old. He died in the home of Jonathan Edwards, who wrote his memoirs. And Brainerd is quoted in that book, The Life of David Brainerd, as saying, "I see nothing else in all the world that can yield any satisfaction besides living to God, pleasing Him, and doing His whole will." Thank you.